All right. So, uh, you know how it is these days? It's like every time you turn around, there's a million news articles and tweets and updates, and it's like, whoa, overload,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
just want to know what's actually important and like how it affects you personally,
Totally.
not the random stuff happening on the other side of the world that you're like, okay, but what about me?
Exactly.
So that's actually what we're looking at today, this whole idea of like cutting through the noise and getting to the good stuff.
Yeah.
And there's this new podcast we found called Complex to Clear. Have you heard of this?
I have, yeah.
They're basically saying they're going to like break down all these complex topics, finance, tech, AI, all that jazz.
It's a big promise. I mean, everyone's looking for that, right? A way to understand this stuff without spending hours and hours.
Right? Like I don't have time to become an economist and a, computer programmer.
Exactly.
So we're going to deep dive into their whole approach and see if they actually deliver on that promise.
Yeah, because there's a real need for that, right? Like we're just inundated with information these days.
For sure. And they actually jump right into a really good example in the first episode. Remember last year when the Fed cut interest rates?
Yeah, it was huge news.
Right. But I'm betting most people, like even if they heard that headline, they might not totally get what it actually means for them, right?
For sure. Like it's one thing to hear about it, but another to really grasp the implications.
Exactly. And that's what I kind of liked about this podcast. They actually connect those dots.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they took that whole Fed rate cut thing and they explained how it directly affects things like mortgage rates.
Yeah.
Which is something that, like, if you're thinking about buying a house or even just paying your current mortgage, like, that's a big deal.
Absolutely. That's a
Yeah.
perfect example of making it relevant, connecting it to people's lives.
Yeah. And they don't just stop there. They go on to talk about like AI breakthroughs, how it might change the job market. Then they go into cryptocurrency regulations. Like, whoa.
Yeah, they cover a lot of ground.
They're ambitious.
They are, which I guess is kind of exciting, but also makes you wonder, like, are they sacrificing depth for breadth?
Totally. Like, can you really unpack something as complex as, I don't know, cryptocurrency in like 10 minutes?
Right, that's the question.
Okay, so let's get into like their style and format, because that's part of what makes them different.
Okay, yeah.
From listening to that first episode, it's very conversational. It's almost like you're just chatting with friends about the news.
Yeah.
Except these friends are like really, really into current events,
Yeah, like your news-savvy friends, maybe a little bit on the nerdy side.
A little bit, but in a good way.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they're not afraid to geek out a little, which I kind of like. It's endearing.
I mean, I gotta say, I kind of dig the whole nerd enthusiasm thing.
All right.
But on a more practical note, how do they actually pull it off? Like, how do they get into all this heavy stuff
Right.
without making it like a whole big thing time-wise?
Yeah, it's a good point because ain't nobody got time for a 3-hour podcast on interest rates. Yeah, and they actually address that right at the beginning, They're like, we get it, you're busy, you got things to do.
Yeah.
So they're all about keeping it short and sweet, which honestly makes sense in today's world, right?
For sure. For sure. I mean, it's like the whole point is to save time, not eat up more of it, right?
Exactly.
But that begs the question, can you really do something like, say, explain a Fed rate cut in a way that's both fast and like actually makes sense?
Right. It's a tough balance to strike, but I think they have a few tricks up their sleeves.
Okay, like what?
Well, first of all, they're really good at using language that's just clear and to the point.
Yeah. None of that jargony stuff.
Exactly. Like, I've definitely been guilty of tuning out when a podcast starts sounding too much like an academic lecture,
Oh, tell me about it. It's like they forget they're talking to real people.
Exactly. So that's one thing they do well. The other thing is they're really focused on the so what, Like, instead of getting lost in the weeds, they always bring it back to how it actually affects you.
Right.
Like that mortgage example we were talking about.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example.
Totally. It makes you realize, oh, wait a minute, this actually matters.
Exactly. And they also use a lot of analogies and real-world examples to make the complex stuff click,
Yeah. Like, imagine it this way.
Exactly. And suddenly it's like, oh, okay, I get it.
That's huge, because if you can connect it to something you already know, it's way more likely to stick.
100%. Now, whether they can pull that off with every single topic, that remains to be seen.
Right.
Some things are just inherently more complicated. But at least for this first episode, I think they struck a pretty good balance.
Yeah, definitely. And it's cool because they're not just trying to lecture at you, right?
Exactly.
They actually want you to be part of the conversation.
Yes. They're big on community, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they actually encourage people to reach out, with their questions, their own take on things, even if they disagree.
Which is kind of refreshing, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times it feels like news is this one-way street.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And let's be real, it's easy to get overwhelmed by all the negativity out there.
Ugh, yes. Doom scrolling is the worst.
The worst. But when you feel like you're part of a community all trying to make sense of things together, it's like, okay, I'm not alone in this.
Right. It's empowering. It's like they always say, right? Misery loves company or something like that.
Haha. Right.
But in this case, it's like good company.
Yeah.
You know, like we're all in this together trying to figure this stuff out.
Exactly. It's like the opposite of that doom scrolling thing we were talking about.
Totally. So, okay, big picture time. We spent a good chunk of time with Complex to Clear now.
We have.
What's the verdict? Do you think they're actually onto something?
You know, based on what we've heard, especially that first episode, I'm kind of optimistic.
Yeah?
Yeah, it seems like they really get it. Like they understand that people are craving this digestible, relatable way to understand the news. And the format, the whole style, it's different. It's fresh.
It is. It's definitely not your typical news hour, that's for sure. But it's early days, right?
Oh, for sure.
One episode does not a podcast make.
Exactly. We'll see if they can keep it up. Like, can they handle even more complex topics, and still make it clear and engaging?
Right. And can they actually build that community they keep talking about?
Yeah.
Because that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, lots of questions. But I guess we'll have to keep listening to see how it plays out.
Exactly. So for our listeners who are like, all right, I'm intrigued, I want to check this out.
Yeah.
What would you say is the biggest thing to keep in mind as they dive into Complex to Clear?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'd say go in with an open mind, but don't check your brain at the door.
Okay, I like that.
Appreciate what they're doing, trying to make this stuff accessible to everyone. But also remember, there's always more to the story, right? Don't be afraid to do your own digging. Look for different perspectives.
So it's like they're giving you the starting point, but then it's up to you to kind of explore from there.
Yeah. It's like they're handing you a map and a compass, but you get to choose your own adventure.
Ooh, I like that. Stealing that. Okay, so on that note, let's leave everyone with a little something to ponder.
Okay, hit me.
In a world that's overflowing with information,
Always.
can we ever really be completely clear on anything?
Ooh, good one.
Or is it more about the journey,
Yeah.
constantly learning, constantly questioning?
I think that's the beauty of it, right? There's always more to learn.
So true. Never stop being curious, right?
Never.
And on that note, we'll wrap it up. If you do check out Complex to Clear, we want to know what you think. Hit us up on all the socials.
Yeah, let's keep the conversation going.
Until next time, stay curious, everyone.